It is my pleasure to welcome our guest speaker today. Alison Herring is an independent historian from Richmond, Virginia, who worked 16 years in Richmond, Virginia and Dallas, Texas for a Big Four public accounting firm as a senior manager in the audit practice, where she led the financial statement audits and ICOFR audits of Fortune 500 clients. She holds a bachelor's degree in accounting from the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville and a master's degree in accounting from the College of William and Mary. She currently serves on the Walton College Accounting Advisory Board at the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville and is a former chair and current member of the Mason Accounting Programs Board at William and Mary. Welcome to all and welcome to our speaker.
Thank you, Alexandra. It is exciting to be here today for this event. So I'm going to chatter away introducing myself while they transition the host responsibilities to me so that I can share my screen and share my slides. I'm glad to be able to be here today. They asked me to do this presentation about a year ago, and it was such a fascinating prospect to be able to do this. Let's see, let me get these slides up. Wonderful. Given my accounting background, I was asked to put something like this together because I think in working with the staff at the Balch Library, I think it's come up that I have used financial records in an unusual way, and I've been able to tease out information that's really helpful to me in my research from financial records. And so today we're going to go over a couple of examples. Hold on, because my screen is not advancing. All right, I'm going to try this one more time. There it goes. Excellent. Okay, so I won't rehash my background, but as Alexandra did explain, I do have a strong accounting background and had a long career at a Big Four public accounting firm, KPMG, where I worked in the audit practice. So I have a strong background in financial records, and I'm not easily daunted by financial records, but I do think for others who might not have that background, seeing financial records pages with a bunch of numbers on it can be daunting and can make your head want to shut down and move on to other documents. So I'm hoping that through this presentation, I can share examples of why hopefully you won't be daunted by this and the really fascinating information that can come out of these records that might not be apparent on the surface. So I'm going to start off with a very high level overview of where I'm headed with this today. I'm going to start off by going over the Beard Family Account Book, which is at the Thomas Balch Library in Leesburg. It's two different types of records. There's records for a mercantile store, and there's also toll gate records within the same book, and we'll talk about that. And that will be also our first introduction to debits and credits, but only at a very high level. So if you're expecting an accounting lesson today, you might be disappointed. We won't be going into detail about that because I will lose everybody if we did. But we'll just go over that at a very high level. And then I've got some interesting examples from an estate from Cuthbert Powell, who died in 1849. Some paperwork, financial records that are in a chancery court case that was filed on that estate that provided some unexpected helpful information. And then I'm going to end us with two different types of personal property tax records. The first being the early records in the early 19th century, and then some fascinating details that are in the post-Civil War personal property tax records, particularly for African-American research that was unexpected for me and that have been a goldmine of information. So let's kick off with the Beard Family Account Book. I'm going to pause on this screen because if you're watching this on the playback, the information that you see here is how you would request this book. If in hearing about this book today, this sounds interesting to you and it's something that you want to have pulled at the Balch Library, this is how you would request it. And that's how I've structured this presentation today, since we knew this was going to be a hybrid. So part of it was going to be virtual and then it would be recorded and available online. I've had that in mind. I've put together information on the screens where somebody could conveniently hit pause while watching the playback and take notes, so that if anyone's feeling rushed on taking notes today, this will be available through a playback. And so that's how I've structured this. The Beard family, so this book covers the late 18th century and then the middle of the 19th century. And the portion that relates to the toll gate records, those were being kept by a man named Stephen Beard, who lived approximately 1781 through approximately 1844, were the years of his life. So that'll help orient you there. Okay, so this is an example of what some of the pages within this book look like. And even I would have looked at this initially and thought, nope, don't think I want to spend a whole lot of time looking at this. On the left here is an example of what the merchant records look like. And they're fairly neat. The handwriting is not terrible, so you can make out information here. The right-hand side are the toll gate records. And so these are a little bit more messy. You can tell the handwriting is different. The way that they're writing it down on the page is different. It's a little bit harder to read. And interestingly, so the toll gate records are in the same book as the merchant records, but they're not separated. It's not like the first half are the merchant records and then the second half are the toll gate. They're recorded on the same page, which is messy. So you can see that in this example here, where you can see my cursor, you can see these are the merchant records and the numbers over here relate to that. But then in this a bit messier handwriting in between are the toll gate records. And the toll gate records tend to go from the back of the book to the front chronologically, whereas the merchant records go from the front to the back. So it's a really interesting specimen. And I will say for the merchant records are a bit of a mystery because we don't know yet where this store was exactly, but we do know approximately where the toll gate was. And I will be able to share that. So let's start just by looking at this just at a high level. So if you come across something like this in your research, maybe you have a book like this in your family that you're looking at, or maybe this is something that's relevant to a project that you're working on. At a high level, there's a couple of things that we can take a look at to help us. The first is that you can see debits and credits. That's what that DR is and what the CR is over on the right. The DR stands for debtor. That's why, otherwise debit doesn't have an R in it. And the CR is for creditor. So the debits in accounting are always going to be on the left. And then the credits are always going to be on the right. That is always true. If you see a place where it's not, probably not everybody's good at their job. And so probably that's an error. Other information that we can see here immediately is the date. We can see that this is the late 18th century, so 1796, 1797. We also know that this is in British pounds. So this is a time where British pounds are sometimes still being used. And I will say that the math is a little bit more difficult here, and we're not going to do the math, but in modern American money, it's 100 pennies per dollar, but that doesn't work that way in these British pounds here, where it's 20 shillings make up a pound and 12 pence make up a shilling. So in order to foot this or sum this, you got to do some conversions first. So it's a little bit more complicated. Luckily, my research is all in the 19th century, so I'm in American dollars. But this is just another element that's interesting that you can see here, that British pounds are being used. We also see the name of a person, Robert Perry. So if this was a book that's in your collection or that you're using, these are other names outside of the Beard family that appear in this book. And I want to point out the word over here, supra. Supra is an old word that's kind of like ditto or same as before. And so what the Beard family is indicating here with supra is that we have an account over here for a Robert Perry, and the credit side is for the same person. So that's what the supra is referring to. So at a high level, this is the type of information that you would be looking at initially to try to get your head around what these records, what type of information is in here. And let's dive in a little bit deeper on the debit side. So when we're looking at the debit side, we can see the types of products that Robert Perry appears to be purchasing. We see tea, we see a reference to a cutting knife, we see sugar and brandy. And so looking at this, if you weren't already familiar with what this book is, you can immediately determine, oh, so this is some type of a mercantile store. And Robert Perry, these are things that he is buying. And then the Beard family is recording that information. So they were clearly running a store, and you can see the types of products that were being sold. These are fairly innocuous, regular, everyday items. So these are items that Beard is selling to Robert Perry, and Robert Perry owes him for this money here. So now let's shift back over to the right-hand side where the credits are, where it says Supra, which is indicating that this is still for Robert Perry. And on the right-hand side, what we see is the phrase buy cash, buy bottle, buy cash, buy cash, and then some numbers over here that are still British pounds. And what this looks like and what this is telling us is that this is where Robert Perry is paying for the goods that he has purchased. And what's really interesting is to see the timing. He's not paying timely for some reason. The earlier date was 1796 throughout that year, and then he's paying in 1797. And the most of it here, the £2, doesn't come in until November. So that's an interesting thing to see. If this was a book that you were studying, or if you were studying the Beard family, it's interesting to know how much are they getting paid and when are they getting paid and in what format are they being paid? Because you can see here an example, it says by bottle. So there was a barter system that was happening where sometimes they were receiving payment in the form of other goods. So Mr. Perry has paid in full for the products that he has bought. And so on the left side, you can see it was £2 and several shillings. And then it's the same on the right, indicating that, okay, he's paid up his account balance. Another interesting point that's on this page is, so he continues to buy more goods. You can see cloth, you can see buttons, etc. There's pepper. And then he's continuing to pay over here on the right, except that when he balanced the account, it wasn't by cash immediately. So here where I've indicated, it says buy your note for £3, etc. And so what has probably happened here is that Mr. Perry is not able to pay Beard timely and has maybe just thrown in the towel and said, I'm just going to have to write you an IOU for now. And probably the Beard family was keeping track of notes receivable in a different book. And they may have gone ahead and recorded that this is balanced now based on the fact that he has signed a note that's more formal that he is going to pay. And so he can show that, okay, that's how this account got balanced, but probably there was another book where he was keeping track of that. So it's interesting information, both if you're coming at this book from the Beard side, so he's the merchant that is operating this business, and from the customer side, Robert Perry could be somebody that you're researching. And it's fascinating to see the types of products that he's buying, how much of it, how much he's paying for it, how quickly, or in this case, slowly, is he paying his bill, and how. These are fascinating things that can shed a lot of light on your research. And so pulling back to a high level, if you see a book like this, the types of information that you can learn from it, in this case, what we learned was that the Beards were running a store, and we can see what type of store it was by going through more of the pages and looking at more of the products that are being sold. And you also might even notice changes in the products that are being sold over time. That could be interesting for your research. We also know who the customers were. So like right now, we don't know yet exactly where this store was located, but probably when someone has enough time to try to determine that, one element that could help is looking at who the customers were and doing a little bit of work on where those people were living. And you can start to narrow down the location based on that. And it's also would be fascinating if you were researching the Beards, who all the customers were. Who were these people? Where did they live? How far away were they? And what types of products were they buying? You can also tell whether or not the Beards were getting paid and when. One element that we aren't able to know from this book is how profitable was the business? How successful was it? Because the piece that we don't have is how much the Beard family paid for these products. So we don't know how much he paid for the tea and the cutting knife. And so we don't have that number to compare to what he sold it for to see what the markup was, which would tell you how profitable the business was. Although if the business was in business for many years, that is an indication that they were able to make money from it and it was sustainable. So let's shift from the mercantile store records to the toll gate records. And I'm going to throw myself under the bus a little bit with this one, because I will acknowledge that the Beard family account book is not something I would ever have thought to request to see at the Balch Library. As much as I would love to just see everything that they have and tell Laura, just start rolling things out, we don't have that kind of time. But it was suggested to me for this presentation today to take a look at this book. And I happily did that several weeks ago, the last time I was up at the Thomas Balch Library. And my jaw dropped in two ways based on the fact that people that are involved in my research appear in these tollgate records in a really fascinating way. And it has shed a bit more light on the people that I research. So let's dive into that and see that type of information. Now, first, I want to orient us geographically. So differently from the mercantile store, we kind of do know where this toll gate was approximately. We know that it was being operated by Stephen Beard, and he owned property. This is the Yardley Taylor map, which is available on the Library of Congress's website. So Stephen Beard owned property approximately here. So to orient us, we have Aldi over here to the west, and then this road is approximately modern Route 50. So he owned a property north of Route 50. At the time, he called it Roseville, and then later it was referred to as Glengyle. So this is close to an area called Lena today. And so knowing that information, I was curious if the Yardley Taylor map indicated, if they had a notation on it for where the toll gate was, if there was one right there. And sure enough, it did. It's right in this vicinity. So this helps confirm where this particular toll gate was. So the name that popped out to me when I was looking through these records, so the first moment where my jaw dropped was I saw the name Cuthbert Powell. So the people that I research are 19th century young women, and Cuthbert Powell was their grandfather. And so that was fascinating to see. And his estate was called Llangollen, and that estate still exists today. It's in southwest Loudoun County, north of Upperville, up Trapp Road, on the west side of Trapp Road. And so I can tell by looking at this that he is traveling through this toll gate fairly regularly. And while looking at this can be kind of daunting, and even the first time I saw it, part of me thought, nope, I definitely don't want to spend a whole lot of time looking at this mess. But if you take it one step at a time, you can figure out the convention that's going on here. So we can begin by looking at the date. So this is much later than the store. This is 1827. And here this reads February 3rd. So I was transcribing it into an Excel document, which I've got just kind of an example down here at the bottom. So 1827, February 3rd, and we have a toll here that for 1.63-63. So initially I wasn't sure what that was referring to. And then we have the 8th. And so I was able to figure out, so this is continuing with February. So February 8th, we have DO, which is ditto for the toll, and then we have a 2-04. And I now know that this is $1.63 and $2.04. And if you add those two together, it does equal the $3.67 over here to the right. So that helps me know, okay, we're back into US dollars now, and that they were using a dash or just a space between the dollars and the pennies. So it's slightly different convention. So I could keep going and see, okay, next row, it's the 10th, ditto for toll, $1.63, February 17th, toll again, $1.63. So I started to create an Excel spreadsheet so that I could make this much more easier to look at, because I don't want to have to go through this information twice. That was a lesson I learned in auditing. If you're going to have to go through some financial information at a very detailed level, you might as well go ahead and type it up, because it doesn't take that much incremental time to do that. And you definitely don't want to have to go through this information that is this level of tedious twice. So I'm going to pull back and show what the year 1827 looked like when I had it in an Excel spreadsheet. And when you pull back from that level of tediousness, what I can see, what's interesting is to take a look at the dates. Like there was a lot, he was traveling a lot in February. He was traveling a lot in March, and then it calms down over the summer months. And then down here at the bottom, it's clear that Stephen Beard had forgotten to charge some tolls, so he's having to add some at the bottom related to 1826, and then earlier in 1827. But looking at the months it's interesting to see, and we'll shed more light on that in a minute about why he might have been traveling a lot during these months. And then as for the toll amounts, I was not able to tell the difference between $1.63 and $2.04, except that these amounts are consistent throughout 20 years of this toll gate. So they were not doing a great job of increasing the fee as you were traveling through that area. And it's always, for Cuthbert Powell, it's either $1.63 or $2.04. And it probably has to do with either the number of horses or the number of wagons that were coming through, since it's so regular like that. And then so what was happening here is down here, it said account sent to Mr. Powell. So he's running up a tab. So as he's running through this toll gate, he's saying something to the effect of just add it to my tab. And then he's getting billed later to pay for his tolls. So the second thing that made my jaw drop and probably hit the floor was when I was looking through the records related to Cuthbert Powell, I spotted the names of and some of the people that were enslaved at Llangollen. The first one that popped out was Godfrey, because it's a darker ink here, and this name just stands out. And I know who Godfrey was. I mean, I know that there was a man named Godfrey who was enslaved at Llangollen. So the names that we can spot are Jim, appears a couple of times here. We have Godfrey, and then we have a man named Willis. And I was really excited to see this because it's just being able to get the names of the enslaved people and know who the enslaver was and which estate that was. This is just vitally important, and it's rare to come across it like this. And so I started to type all of that out too into this Excel spreadsheet. And what I noticed is sometimes there's a name, right? So we see here Jim, but then we come down here in November, there are no names. And so what I suspect is happening is that if it was Cuthbert traveling through, they didn't indicate his name because this is his account. But if it was one of his enslaved men that was traveling through on Cuthbert's behalf, then the name of the enslaved man was recorded. Here's just a quick aside, an interesting example where it says 2 teams, which may be an indication of why sometimes it's a different fee than it was earlier. So if I pull back, and I showed the years 1833 and 1834 here, because they were fairly clean. And I look at, we can see more about the times of the year that he's traveling, which we can see it's mostly the winter months. In other years, it tends to start like in mid to late November. He's traveling often along this toll road. The same in December, a lot in January. And then it cools off over the summer, and it picks back up again in December. This one's interesting. It was June 6th for 20 cents. Probably Cuthbert was traveling through on horseback maybe and didn't have a wagon with him. So that may be why it was so much cheaper. And you can also continue to see, well, the amounts are the same, except for where some were recorded. If there was some were recorded on the same line or on the same date, then the foot is bigger. So it's fascinating to see that. And what I theorized and what we're going to see later was that probably this is, the harvest of their crops was in the summer. And so once they've harvested it, now they're selling it. And we know that they were selling it locally in the area where they were living in Southwest Loudoun. And this indicates, I think, to me, that they were hauling product to Alexandria for sale, because I just don't think that they would have been going as often as this, where it's just they're going every couple of days. Somebody is going through here, if it was just going for supplies. So pulling back from the toll gate records to a higher level, the types of information that we can see in there are who is traveling through this toll gate area. How often are they traveling? You can see the names of enslaved people. And in our case for Cuthbert, once I typed all of them out going across 20 years, it's almost entirely Jim and Godfrey. And occasionally it's William. Occasionally it's a man named Willis or Ben. Once it was a man named Thomas. But predominantly it was Jim and Godfrey. And we can see how often that they're traveling through there and what that tells us, what time of year they're traveling through. Also interesting is the names that I don't see, which I found fascinating. For example, there's a lot of other really large farms in Southwest Loudoun County that I was amazed not to see, like the name Delaney, for example, traveling through that area. If it was common for these farms to be hauling their crops to Alexandria for sale, why am I not seeing other names? And a theory that I have is that these records are such a mess. These are not the types of records that this man would have been submitting to somebody else for review. I think in most cases, people may have been paying by cash. And if they were paying by cash, he probably had a separate book keeping track of that. But as people like Cuthbert Powell that were coming through not paying by cash right away, he was having to keep a tab. And since this was just for his own benefit, keeping a tab of this, he was using this old merchant book to keep track of this. And another theory is that Cuthbert Powell was a well-known man. He'd been the mayor of Alexandria, had a big estate, and it could be that certain privileges were extended to him traveling through that Stephen Beard might have been willing to say, sure, pay me later. I'll just add it to your tab, whereas others might not have had that privilege. So it was just interesting to me to also consider what names am I not seeing in this toll book. And I'll pause and say that Mary Fishback at one time went through these books, so both the mercantile portion and the tollgate portion, and made a list of the surnames that appear in these records. It's a long list. So at the end of this presentation today, I have a couple of slides that show the names that I'm going to put up for just a couple of seconds each. And this is the type of information that you can go back and watch the replay to look for any names that appear in your research. And hopefully that will be helpful to you, because otherwise that document lives within this file for the Beard family account book. So let's leave the account book behind for now and switch over to financial information that you can find in Chancery Court records, estate records. And as I said a moment ago, that Cuthbert Powell had a suit filed through Chancery on his estate. He had a very large estate, and it was fairly complicated. And I don't detect any animosity among his children. So my theory is that this court case was filed more to take advantage of the processes that happen with a Chancery Court case to keep it organized and even for all of his descendants. So I think it had more to do with just the logistics of settling this estate than it did any animosity. But within these records, mostly it's handwritten like memos or will documents and other summaries in sentence form. But there were some financial records in there, and this is a high-level look at a couple of the pages. He died in 1849, and they had to perform accounting for the estate because Llangollen as a farm was still operating, and Cuthbert Powell still owed money to people that had to be paid. So there were expenses that needed to be paid. And because Llangollen was still operating, there was income coming in from the sale of crops and other types of revenue. And I initially overlooked this, I'll be honest, even with my background. This just looked like a bunch of tedious nonsense. I mean, I kind of scanned through it, and I just initially did not think I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. Because again, Cuthbert Powell is the grandparent of the people that I researched, and I was trying to avoid rabbit holes. But ultimately, I did go down, and one convention you're going to see, hopefully it's not being cut off on your screen, but if it is, on the left side, we have the debits, and on the right side, we have credits. So it's following the same convention that debits are on the left and credits are on the right. And we're going to dive in and get an understanding of, well, which is which. So what type of information makes up the debits and what type of information makes up the credits. So once you have that straight in your head, then you can start looking through it to see what type of details there are. So diving into the debit side of the estate, when I started looking through the transactions, which some of them you can see are not terribly clear. It's just to cash, Lloyd Powell. We've just got some names here. But there were some examples of where we know that the left side, the debits, are money that's being paid by the estate. So this is expenses. So it's money or things that are outbound. So in that respect, it's similar to the Beard account book, where on the left-hand side, it was products being sold. And a convention that I see a lot with the debit side is to cash, is a phrase that's common on the debit side. And a couple things to point out here. Two of the ways that I knew that these were purchases being made or expenses being recorded is they paid for a shroud for Cuthbert Powell's burial, and there's also here for a coffin. Like saying, in other words, I know that Llangollen, they're not selling coffins or selling shrouds. So on this side of the page, these are things that they're paying for. So this is money that's outbound. And it's really fascinating to see the kinds of information that's in here, and it sheds light that goes beyond just Cuthbert Powell and sheds light on Southwest Loudoun County in general. For example, they're paying laborers for the harvest. So I know the dates are cut off on this, but this was in July and August, and they're harvesting the crops. And here I want to point out at the top, we have Sidney Bailey and Mr. Lucius. And these two white men owned estates north of Llangollen. And here they're paying for harvest hands. So this is a reference to enslaved people. So these two white men have leased out the people that they have enslaved on their property to help with the harvest of the crops at Langolan. And we see it again a little bit further down for Levin Powell, that's Cuthbert's son, for harvest hands on his farm. So what I think this tells us is that when these men on these large farms were thinking about the labor force that they needed to harvest their crops, I think they thought bigger than just the people that they had on hand on their estate, that they could lease labor from some of the surrounding farms to help with the harvest, and very likely would do the same in turn, that once the crops were harvested at Langolan, leased out the enslaved people to other estates to help with the harvest. So I think they may have been viewing the labor force in Southwest Loudoun County on a much bigger level than just how many people were on your farm. But we also see some white men are being paid to help with the harvest. And these names all appear nearby on census records, so you can tell that these are men within the neighborhood. For example, John Ross, the Rosses had a farm north of Langolan. We see Lloyd Powell, that's his grandson. So he's helping with the harvest. Kidwell is a name of a white family that appears regularly in that area. They tended to be overseers on various farms. Also, we have more names of enslaved people. So here we have Henry and Jim. We met Jim earlier as he was hauling product back and forth to Alexandria, and we can see that they were paid for labor, and we don't know why. Why was it Henry and Jim, and why was it $1.50? That's still a mystery right now. And we have another man here, Ned, was also paid. This is an enslaved man, paid 25 cents. So what's interesting is it has more names of enslaved people, and we can see that they were being paid a pittance for the labor to help with the harvest, and you can see the pay disparity. They were being paid $1.50. Ned was paid 25 cents. So examples of fascinating information that can exist in these records that go beyond just an understanding of Cuthbert Powell. So moving over to the right-hand side, on the credit side, what we see is income that's coming in. And so you see the same convention here for the credit side that we saw in the Beard family account book, where, remember, in that book, he was receiving money by cash, or he was receiving payment by bottle. So on the credit side, there tends to be the phrase by cash, with ditto going down. And so this side is income that the estate is earning. Again, Langolan farm was still operating, so they've already had the harvest and they've paid the laborers for that. So here comes the income, and we can see what types of crops they were growing at Langolan, including corn, hay, straw, and we can see who they're selling to. And a lot of these are men in the neighborhood. And we can also see that other farmers in the area were leasing land at Langolan where they could put their animals out for pasture. So another form of income that Langolan was earning was pasture money, including Cuthbert's son, Charles Powell, who still had a sizable farm in Southwest Loudoun County at this time, but was still paying to have his animals in pasture at Langolan. So an interesting form of income that I don't know that I would have expected, that we can see over here. And then just looking at the neighbors, and also paying attention to the time of year. Remember, the toll gate records were largely in the winter, so December, January, and we can see similar transactions at similar time of year in these estate records. So this will take a bit of a dark turn here, because as I've already said, there are names of enslaved people that are in these records. And Cuthbert Powell, when he died, in his will, he said he wanted all of his personal property to be sold to pay his personal debts. And enslaved people were considered personal property. So they were sold along with all of the other personal property that he had. And so an auction was held on Wednesday, December 19th, 1849 at Langolan. And we know that it happened at Langolan. That auction is mentioned in the Powell Family Papers, and that Powell relatives attended that auction. It's a week before Christmas. It's already a traumatizing time of year for the enslaved people because leasing contracts were on a calendar year. So at the end of the year, somebody who had been leased out is going to be returning back to their enslaver and then finding out, well, what happens to me next year? Am I going to be leased out again? Is it to the same place? Could this happen to my children? So it was already a very difficult time of year. So it's a difficult thing to be happening anyways, but it was already at a hard time. So these are the names of the people from the inventory of Cuthbert Powell that we know were potentially going to be put up for sale. And I know that 28 of the 34 were sold. These 4 were not sold because they were considered too old or otherwise unable to work. And it was illegal in Virginia to sell somebody who was not able to work, not out of compassion, but out of a desire to prevent fraud. These 2 individuals were willed separately. Jarrett is a child who was owned by a trust, and the income that he would be earning through his labor was going into that trust. And the trust is a long story for a different day. And Fanny was a woman that Cuthbert Powell's widow, Catherine, wanted to keep. So these 6 were still separated from this community, but were not sold at auction. And the rest were sold at auction. And we can see some names that we have met earlier today, one being Jim. There's 2 named Jim. I think the one that we've met earlier is probably this one because this is 20 years later. And so he's getting older. And we also see Godfrey again. And interestingly, we can know how old he was because it says that he was 50 years old. And this was a community of people that had existed at Llangollen for 36 years. And I imagine there was a close bond among these people. Many of them were relatives. Tom and Jenny are a married couple, and Daniel is one of their children. He's an adult. And Ariana Bingham, the enslaved woman that I study, who is owned by Cuthbert's son, Charles Powell, these are her parents, and Daniel is her brother. And so this community of people was obliterated and torn apart in one afternoon in 1849. And we can piece together what happened to some of them and to all of them as a whole. So a couple of examples here we can see we have the date. So December 19th helps confirm that we know that that's the day that the auction happened. And here we see the name J. Bruin for his purchase. This is James Bruin, who ran Joseph Bruin, excuse me, Joseph, who ran a slave trading operation out of Alexandria. So of the terrible options of what could happen to you that day, this is the one that they were wanting to avoid the most, was being sold to a slave trader, because these individuals either would have been marched to Alexandria to be sold, where they could have ended up anywhere, or if he had agents operating on his behalf in this part of the state, they could have been sold within that area, because I doubt he traveled all the way from Alexandria to attend this sale. He likely had an agent do this. We also see Joseph Campbell purchased Betsy. And through other information earlier in this document, we know that Joseph Campbell was the overseer at Llangollen. And there were 2 women named Betsy. One was an older woman and the other one was a 10-year-old child. And since the census was just taken barely a year later, because this is 1849 and we have a census in 1850, I was able to determine that this is 10-year-old Betsy, and she's the only one that he purchased. So we don't know who her parents are, but she has been separated from her family. This is a couple more examples where the top half we have names of white people who are making purchases of enslaved people where we don't see the name, but we can see the amounts. And I'll point out that for these bottom 3, the amounts are smaller and some are even kind of uneven. And that's because they're paying over time. And so in order to know how much they paid, I needed to go through the whole of these financial records to look for payments that were made later. But at the bottom half here, we see some of the names of the enslaved people. So here's Godfrey again. We've met him a few times today. He was purchased by a man named Joel Harper, who was running a store in Upperville. From what I can find, there were ads in the Alexandria Gazette about his store. So he was sold to Upperville. And this is extremely rare, where we have the first name and a last name. We have Alfred Coleman, who was sold. And I will point out, this is why it's so important to, when you're doing this kind of work, is to participate in a community of people with it. So for me, it's within Loudoun, because another researcher, Joseph Roby, immediately recognized the name Alfred Coleman. And he was researching an enslaved man by that name who married a woman who was enslaved at Oakley. which was the estate of Ida Powell Delaney. And so he married a woman there, and they had a family. And so we think this is the same Alfred Coleman. It's already unusual for someone to be listed by name, and even more unusual to be listed by a first name and a last name. And he was purchased by James Bradshaw Beverly, who had estates in Fauquier and in Loudon. And one of his estates was Avenel, which is in proximity to Ida Powell Delaney's estate. So probably that kind of helps us piece together how Alfred Coleman met his wife and started their family. Also, I'll point out poignantly, I think I know who this Godfrey was. Right now, it's still preliminary. But if I'm right, there was a man named Godfrey Bailey who was a Black man on the 1870 census. He had a son named Miles Hedgeman, and who married Alfred Coleman's daughter, Tulip, which previously Joseph Roby didn't know who the father of Alfred Coleman was, because that information was buried in some other records that I found. I'm sorry, the father of who, like Miles Hedgeman, like the USCT troop. So he fought for the U.S. Army in the Civil War through the U.S. colored troops, and his father appears to be this Godfrey Bailey, and we think Godfrey Bailey is the same Godfrey that's in these records. So we were thinking about, well, how had Godfrey's son Miles met Alfred's daughter Tulip? Well, we know a piece of that information is that these two men were enslaved on the same plantation up through 1849, and so could have been friends or at least stayed in touch, and that is how their children met. So I can piece together the auction at a high level, even though we don't know what happened to the majority of the people, because only a few were mentioned by name. Since some were mentioned by name, and I know how much money was spent at this auction in total, I could back into it and determine about how many people some of the others purchased. And then could take a look at, well, where were those people? So this is a breakdown of this auction geographically, where we can see that most stayed within Virginia, and 62% stayed within that immediate Southwest Loudoun and Northern Fauquier area, where those individuals had the anticipation or the possibility of staying in touch with their relatives. Like, we can know now that the Civil War is coming and emancipation is coming, but they didn't know this at that time. And so those who stayed in this area had the possibility of staying in touch with relatives through a communication network, or maybe even being reunited with them. Same is true for those who were just a bit further away in Virginia. They went to places like Alexandria and Louisa County, so not in the immediate area. About 2 or 3 went to Kentucky. Cuthbert Powell had a son, Llewellyn Powell, who was a physician and lived in downtown Louisville. And so he purchased some individuals. And so, well, I'll get to staying within the family in a moment. And then the ones who had the worst fate, approximately 20% were sold to the slave trader, Joseph Bruin, where they may have been marched to Alexandria and sold far away. We can also take a look at how many of them stayed within the Powell family. And a little over half stayed within the Powell family, including the 3 that went to Kentucky. So while going to Kentucky is a terrible fate, you're being dragged away from relatives potentially. By staying within the Powell family, there's the possibility that you could potentially stay in touch. You might be able to prevail upon Llewellyn Powell or his wife to write to the farms where your family are enslaved, and you might be able to get news back on them and know what's happening with them. And just under half were sold outside of the Powell family, but still some of these stayed within that immediate geographical area. So this is an example of you can see a lot of tedious information in these financial records, like what I found here in this Chancery Court case, but you can piece together information that gets much bigger than that and sheds light not just on the Powells, but the enslaved community that existed in Southwest Loudoun County in general. That's so important. So at a high level, what we've seen in these Chancery Court cases, or in this one in particular, we can see the types of income that a family or an individual was earning, particularly if they were running a business that's still operating in the days, months, and years after the person has died. We can see the types of expenses that are being incurred and who those expenses are being paid to. Cuthbert Powell also had debt, and I can see in these records who had loaned him money and how much and how old was that debt. We can also see crops being harvested, and it tells us what those crops were, and we can see how the harvest was happening, meaning who the people were that were working that. And we can see the names of enslaved people. So these records were a much bigger gold mine for me than I initially realized, even with my background. And I'm thankful I went through them. And I hope that this makes the point that when you come across records like this, if you're not used to seeing financial records, instead of your head shutting down or you feeling overwhelmed, just dive in to this, get an understanding of what the debit side and the credit side are. And you can find information like this that can be really helpful in your research. So I am going to put up a slide to be helpful because I've seen enough financial records in a lot of different places and in a lot of different formats that I feel safe to be able to say, if this still feels like Greek to you and you come across something like this, in general, the debits are always on the left and the credits are always on the right. In general, the debits are money that's being paid out or loaned out or goods that are being sold out. And often you'll see to cash or to something else is a convention that happens on this side. The credit side is money being received. It's income earned, or it's goods being received, or it's a debt that's being repaid back to you. And another convention that exists here is by cash. So on the left side being the debits and to, the right side being the credits and by. But my inner auditor wants to put a bit of a caveat or a warning on this because there are likely exceptions to this that I just haven't come across, but I have seen enough different types of books in different locations to be comfortable to say that this was generally a convention. Also, I want to point out accounting and finance records are only as good as the people who are keeping those records. Not everybody is good at their job. That's the same was true then as it is today. And so I want to be careful about painting with a wide brush here and making a generality, because you may come across records that were not well kept by somebody, and I would hate to cause confusion. I also want to point out, in case anyone thought you just got an accounting lesson, you definitely didn't. The modern debits and credits are far more complicated than this. And so this is the type of slide that I've put up that if this could be useful to you, you can go back and watch the replay and make a screen grab of this and use it as a cheat sheet when you come across financial records. All right, let's dive into the personal property tax records. This is the last section, although I've got two portions in here. We've got some early personal property tax records and then some later 19th century records to see the kinds of information that you can find in here. And kicking this off, for those who are watching this who are not used to looking at personal property tax records, I thought this might be helpful. They are organized by county. So for me, when I'm pulling the microfilm at the Library of Virginia, I'm looking for Loudoun County. And then within the county, they're organized by districts. And sometimes the districts are numbered, like 1 through 4. Other times it's got the name of the man that was overseeing that district, like his surname. And then they're in alphabetical order by last name. And so when I first got started doing this, I was having to look through all of the districts to figure out where Cuthbert Powell and Charles Powell were. And then once I could figure out, oh, they're in district, I don't even remember what it is now, but district 2, then I could fast forward through the microfilm and just go straight to district 2 for that year. So there's columns going across in personal property tax records, and those column headers can change from year to year. There are years where they were consistent, but other years there's more information added. Other years, some information comes off. Frustratingly, the column headers are not on every page. They're only on the front page, which drives me crazy, because when that happens, you're inviting error to happen, because if you're working, it's like working in an Excel spreadsheet where you can't see the top row, so you can forget which column is which. And I'm confident that happened. And so by not having the column headers across is frustrating, especially considering how much time these men spent filling out these records. You think they could just take a minute, and at the top of each page while you're working on that page, just write it down. But not everybody's good at their job. So a good convention to do is, if you are wanting to print these personal property tax records, like the page where the person you're researching is, you're going to want to do that for not just the page where they are, but get the first page for that year, so that you know what the column headers are. And the same is true if you're saving it to a thumb drive. Make sure you get the page that has the column headers. So before I get into some of the interesting stories and questions that can be answered in these personal property tax records, we'll just take a quick look at an example. So this is for the year 1812, where we can see Cuthbert Powell, and we see the columns going across, and this is what the header looks like on the front page. Frustratingly, it's difficult to read. And so just for interest, I have transcribed it here. So this is just for 1812. And the columns we're going to be focusing on are just these first three, where we have men over the age of 16 years old, meaning they're taxed if you're a man and you're over 16. Slaves that were over 16 years old, and then another category for slaves that were between 12 and 16 years old. So these personal property tax records are a place you can look to see how many enslaved people somebody had and how old they were. So adding these two numbers together, you know how many enslaved people were at least 12 years old or older. And then other information that's being taxed, we have horses, studs, rates of covering, which is a term referring to horse breeding, carriages, and then there's a total amount of tax that was owed. But we're just going to focus on these first three columns for a particular answer that I was looking for. So one of the questions that came up in my research is, when did the Powells move to Llangollen? They were the ones who built the house. Their enslaved people built the house that stands there today. And in the records left behind by descendants, it's unclear when they moved from Alexandria to Llangollen, and the personal property tax records help answer that question. So what's interesting to see is, like in 1812, we have Cuthbert Powell is listed here, but there are no white men listed, but we have enslaved people. There's 7 total, and there's some animals that have been sent out there. The same is true for 1813. Here he is listed, and there's a dash here, so he's not out there, and well, his sons aren't old enough to be listed anyway, so he's not out there. And but there are still enslaved people out there, and animals. And then beginning in 1814, and I know this is hard to read, it's just the nature of microfilm, it's part of the charm. We have Cuthbert Powell listed here, and he's listed for the first time. So we have the number 1, and his sons are still very young, so they haven't turned 16 yet. And then we can see that the enslaved people went up quite a bit because he brought people with him from Alexandria. So this helps provide information about, well, when did they move? So it was either late 1813 after the taxes were taken, or early 1814. Now there's other circumstantial evidence that has surfaced that tells me that it was in late 1813. But this is the type of questions you can get answered by looking at the personal property tax records, the timing of when somebody moved from place to place. And it's another place to get information on enslaved people. How many did a particular family have enslaved? So I've shifted this one to just look at a table for all of our sanity, because these records are difficult to look at. There's a couple other questions that I was able to answer using personal property tax records. The first one, and we're just going to focus on the top half of this table, was so there's a woman that Cuthbert's son Charles enslaved. Her name was Ariana. And I felt that her parents were Tom and Jenny, based on she would go out of her way to go and travel to see them and would take her children with her. So that's an indication that they might have been her parents. And if that were true, then they needed to be listed in the inventory, and they were. And I also know that Charles Powell in the 1830s, he didn't have much money. He just graduated from law school. But all of a sudden in 1831, he has 5 people. And where did that money come from? So my theory was that they came from his father, that his father gave him enslaved people from Llangollen. And circumstantially, this indicates that that is true. So in 1830, Cuthbert Powell had 16 enslaved people. Over the age of 12, Charles had none. The next year it drops, and it doesn't usually drop. When I looked at the pattern or the trends of the enslaved people across several years for the Powells, it tended to tick up a bit. And so it dropped from by 3 people. So that's going to be a net change, though. So that doesn't include the people who turned 12. And then all of a sudden, Charles Powell has 5. So this is a piece of circumstantial evidence where there's a lot more circumstantial evidence that tells me that Ariana came from Llangollen and that her parents were Tom and Jenny. This is just an extra piece that supports that it appears that the enslaved people that Charles Powell had came from his father. And the bottom half of the table, we're not focusing on Cuthbert at this point, so these are blank. So I'm only focusing on Charles. his enslaved people dropped quite a bit between 1834 and 1835. He went from having 7 down to 3. And the reason this was important to me and why I went looking for this is he moved to Louisville, Kentucky in late 1835. And we know one of the people he took with him was Ariana Bingham. And she had a baby in Louisville, Kentucky, and is responsible for the earliest baptism of an enslaved child in Louisville, Kentucky. And that's an important fact. And I needed to, because her name is not on the record, the name of her child is not on that record, and the gender of the child is not. It just says child belonging to Charles Powell. And we know that the child was enslaved based on the way that they referred to him. And we know it was a him now, but somebody could try to push back on me and say, well, the names aren't there. You don't really know that that's Ariana, except that we know for a fact there's hard evidence that she did have a baby in Louisville, Kentucky. And what we can see is that only 3 people went with him. And still, he might have sold 1 or 2 of these before going to Louisville, Kentucky, because he went from 7 down to 3, which helps narrow down. There were only 3 people ages 12 and older. So the odds of it being a different woman, because probably one of these is going to be a man. And so the odds of it being another woman are very, very, very low. And this is also one of the ways that he funded the trip. So when he sold these individuals, because he didn't own the farm that he was living on, it was his father's, this provided money that helped fund that trip when they went to Louisville, Kentucky. So another couple of examples of questions that can be answered by taking a look at the personal property tax records, particularly year to year. So I had typed them out in Excel where I could look down and see how the numbers were going up or down. And what did that tell me? Oh, I had stars on that I forgot about. All right. So this very last section is the personal property tax records post-Civil War. And fascinatingly, what we have on these records are the locations of Black men were recorded in these records. So I'm going to zoom in on this one a bit, where over here for 1867, we've got some examples of lists of Black men because they were being taxed. That's why the men are listed. Sometimes there are women. It's unusual. It tends to be if they own something that's being taxed, they'll be listed here. And so we have are the names of these people, and then the residence or employer of these Black people is listed on some of the census records. And this matters for me or anybody who was researching African Americans, because post-Civil War, because you can go into these personal property tax records and find out which farm they were working on and who their employer was, and then you can look at how that changes from year to year. Now the locations aren't on every year, so I've tried to be helpful here, and this is one of the examples where somebody can go back to the replay and hit pause if you find this helpful. But for Loudoun County, the locations are recorded for 1867 and 1868. Some of them for 1869. It looked to me like the guy just ran out of steam. Not everyone's good at their job, so he didn't complete it for everybody, all of the Black people in 1869. And it's same for 1874. And we have gap years here where these years in between locations are not recorded. And then these are other years where I was able to see the location of the people that I'm researching. So let's look at a couple of examples. So I've mentioned Ariana Bingham already. Charles Bingham was her husband, and William Bingham was their son. And here we can see they're both listed on the 1867 personal property tax records, and we can see where they were working. This was James Beamestoffer, and I know from other records outside of here that he was a tenant farmer at Newstead Farm in southwest Loudoun County. And it's interesting that they're working together on this same farm, but they don't stay there. By 1868, now they're working for Caldwell Holiday, which is interesting that they were moving around. And Caldwell Holiday had a farm in proximity of Middleburg. Oh, I do want to go back a moment because I didn't mention that other types of information you can see on here. Look, so we see an Osborne Bailey is at Langolan. So if you were researching, which I am, Langolan, I can go through these records and piece together who was working at Langolan after the war. And you also see names, like down here at the bottom, we have Richard Delaney at Welburn, and a man named Charles Bowman is working there. Now, I think the reason Langolan is mentioned by the estate name versus the owner is that George Eyre owned Langolan at that time, and he owned a lot of farms. in Southwest Loudoun. And so if they had just put George Eyre, that wouldn't, if they're trying to get the location of these men, saying George Eyre isn't helpful because you don't know which estate you're referring to. So I think that's why they said Llangollen. And so back to looking at Charles and William Bingham are still together on the 1868 census, and they have moved and are working for somebody else. And when I was looking at this, the Caldwell Holiday name rang a bell. Like I'd seen that name before. And what I noticed is I went to the 1870 census, which is the first census where African Americans are listed by name. And I noticed that Ariana's daughter, so she was also named Ariana Bingham, was working on the same estate for Caldwell Holiday. So what this tells me is I probably need to do a dive into Caldwell Holiday soon, since at least three of them were working on this estate after the war. And I also wanted to share this image from the 1868 personal property tax records to show the contrast between the Black residents and the white residents. So for the white residents here, we know these are white for a couple of reasons. One, there's two different columns. So if you're white, the number goes in the left column. If you're Black, the number goes in the right. And we see there's locations recorded for Black people and employers, but it's not for white residents. This is probably rooted in the vagrancy laws that were passed after the Civil War. And they were keeping tabs and continuing to try to control Black people. And so that's why these locations were recorded for them and not white people. Or at least I think that's very likely why. Another example, and in this example, we see that Charles Bingham and William Bingham, his son, in 1869, are recorded on the same row. William actually was not 21 yet in these earlier years, so he wasn't supposed to be taxed. And maybe they figured that out and put him on the same row here because he is 21 by now. So he's listed on the same row. And where we can get from this is genealogy. So if I didn't know that Charles Bingham had a son, William, or if I was researching a William Bingham and didn't know who his father was, the personal property tax records give me that information. And I can also see that they've moved again and they're working for Samuel Cox, or at least in his house. So that provides interesting information to me that the Binghams weren't staying necessarily in one place, that they were moving about. And if we were to take a look at the other Black men in the area for Southwest Loudoun, it would be interesting to know how many people was that true for? Were they moving around a lot more after the Civil War than staying in one place? There's another example up here of some genealogy. We have a William Bolden and his son James. And there were a couple of examples as I was scanning through the pages of 3 generations where it might say William Bolden and son James and maybe son William. And so you could have 3 different generations. So somebody who's doing genealogy on African Americans might want to spend time looking through these personal property tax records to see if you can get more family members to piece together from this, given these couple of examples that we see here. So pulling back from this, it's just an example of you don't want to overlook personal property tax records, particularly these that are after the Civil War, because you can see the locations of where these Black men were working and who their employers were, and you can get a sense of how often they moved. And if I were, when I'm researching Llangollen, I can go through these records and determine who the men were that were working at Llangollen after the Civil War. And there is occasional genealogy in here. So these records aren't just a bunch of numbers about how much taxes people paid. There is a lot of social history that's important that you can tease out of these records. And with that, this concludes the presentation for today. And I'll quickly recap while you're organizing your questions in your head, that we've been over the Beard Family Account Book, and that exists at the Thomas Balch Library, and you can pull that to look for people that you are researching. And we've gone over, how to determine the debits and credits. We knew that this was a merchant book, and it had toll booth records, and we've been through some examples through estate financial records and personal property tax records. And as promised, while you're organizing your questions, I'm going to put this screen up for just a couple of seconds. So this is the point where someone's going to go back and look at the replay, or those of you that are watching this later on YouTube can hit the pause button right here and look through these names. And we got to give a hat tip to Mary Fishback who was the one who went through this to make this list of names. And I'll put up the next one. And what she's done is she's put the first name and last name, the year, and then in parentheses is a number, and that's the page number, so that you don't have to go through every page trying to find out where your person is. You can go straight to, like Mrs. Crane here, page 165, and then the pages are numbered at the top. Some of the pages get cut off, but if you can do the math looking at a couple pages before, a couple pages after to find out, to get to the page numbers. So this is the third and last slide with the names on it that you could go back and look at the replay and hit pause for. And with that, I would like to open it up for questions to see what struck you about this presentation and what questions you have. So I see a question in the chat already that's asking, was Cuthbert Powell possibly a shipper for others due to the frequency of his tolls? And I have thought about that, so I'm glad you brought that up because I didn't mention it. I have thought that perhaps he was, because he had these wagons and he had these enslaved people that were able to do this, that he could have been hauling product for others into Alexandria and could have been being paid to do that, or at least I would hope he would charge for that. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn the presentation back over to the Balch Library so that they can help us manage the Q&A. So I'll go ahead and ask if it should be Anna. I'm going to go ahead and assume yes. Or is it someone that's in the classroom? I'm going to go ahead and put this back over to Anna so that she can let me know. Oops, there it goes. So there are some questions coming into the chat that I can take a look at. One is on personal property taxes, were male and female people taxed or just male? On the personal property taxes, it's just the men that were taxed. So that's why you won't see. So like for the white, well, let me back up for that. So for the white people, it's just the men. It's a good question on the personal property taxes. It doesn't say if it's men or women for the enslaved people. I think it's both, because when I know about how many people were enslaved by Cuthbert Powell and Charles Powell based on other records, and the number of people that are in the personal property tax records is pretty close to what I see, for example, on the census, recognizing though that the enslaved children that are under the age of 12 are not listed. Have you done similar research in other states, and have you found similar types of records? I have not done research in other states, but I imagine for at least Virginia that the personal property tax records were similar in other counties. I know from another researcher that the records appear to be the same for Fauquier County, meaning that the years where the locations are noted are in the Fauquier County records for the same years. But as for other states, I don't know, since the personal property taxes were state by state. Out of all of these types of records, which have been the most helpful for your research? Oh, that is a really good question. I think as far as the volume of information, the estate accounting records had the most volume and variety of information in them. I think I'll answer that the personal property tax records post-Civil War for Black people are probably the most valuable because we just can't get at that information any other way. So I'll answer that question with those two. Let me read a couple more of these questions. Okay, so this one's asking, can you find out information doing a search at the county level versus an individual property or name? For example, the Lafayette visit to Leesburg in 1825. So I think I know the answer to this, and you can let me know if I didn't quite get the answer to this question right, or if I didn't understand your question. So in order to see, so you've got to go county, so it's county by county. So for me, starting with Loudoun and then going down to the district that I know that where the Powells are living, and then it's an alphabetical order from there. So if you were looking for a particular person, maybe somebody who was hosting the Marquis de Lafayette, you would get to it that way. Know where the county was, know what district they were in, and then look alphabetically by name. Oh, somebody caught a math error that I had. My bad. I'm amazed I didn't catch that. I'm so diligent on that. Nice job, Mark. So yes, obviously. But I mean, on that one, I think that one was the one on who stayed within the Powell family versus who didn't. And that it's still the same answer, that more than half, just more than half, stayed within the Powell family. So I think what happened there was earlier on, I had misinterpreted somebody who had a very large purchase the same day of the sale, which was December 19th. George Addy, the minister in Leesburg, spent $800 that day. And because the amount was even and it was so big, it seemed like that was probably a few enslaved people. But there was other evidence later on that indicated that that was not, that it was a coincidence, that he bought other personal property that day that was not enslaved people. So I later had to go back and adjust the numbers for that. So that's how that happened. Otherwise, I can do math. All right, this is so a comment about Alfred Coleman and James B. Beverly, Rebecca Delaney, Ida Delaney's daughter, married James. So there's another connection. So this is Joseph Roby pointing out that there's another connection between these enslaved people, which, any connections that we can find out like that are so valuable, and it can help circumstantially confirm that the man named Godfrey Bailey that was living in Upperville, on the 1870 census, that's the same Godfrey that was at Langolan. And I can expand on that a little bit because I could only find 2 Black men named Godfrey on the 1870 census. One was living a little bit further away in Loudon up in Hamilton, and then the other one was Godfrey Bailey in Upperville. And the reason I'm leaning towards Godfrey Bailey being the same Godfrey at Langolan is because of his proximity to where we know he was enslaved, and the fact that his son married the daughter of another enslaved man that was on the same plantation. That relationship makes me lean towards the fact that Godfrey Bailey is the same Godfrey. So this one's asking, are personal property tax records for Loudon after 1850 available online? I have the CD of the earlier ones. I don't think they are. If someone else knows that, you're free to speak up. I don't think they are. Where I access these personal property tax records is on microfilm, either at the Balch Library or at the Library of Virginia, which is convenient for me because I live in Richmond. Any questions from within the room? I don't know how you all are managing that. When Sappher's got to have some.
So you are correct. We've been managing that through the Balch Lib. So we've already been feeding those questions. So I'm sure a couple of those were Win.
I got to know, did I get a thumbs up from Win?
I'm not in that room, so I'm sure Balch Lib can speak up to see if he gave a thumbs up.
Daunting to have another fellow auditor, a former auditor, watching the same presentation.
But you did a great job. I think it really shows how you can use these records to make connections that you otherwise wouldn't be able to find, and that's really valuable. So we really appreciate you doing this presentation for us.
Thank you. And I'll also point out it's important when you're doing the research to make friends with the archivists and other researchers, because I would not have pulled the Beard family account book. I wouldn't have even have known to do that, except that Laura Christensen and Win Sappher recommended it. And I did it for this presentation and struck gold in both the names of enslaved people and finding interesting information about how often Cuthbert Powell or somebody on behalf of him were traveling through that toll gate. So thank you all. I really appreciate it.
It looks like we have one more question.
Okay.
How would you determine overpricing of military goods in the Civil War?
Ooh, that gets outside of my wheelhouse. I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I mean, other than at a high level, if you were to trace, so I assume that this is getting at that prices of any good during the war went through the roof. And so if you were tracking, you would just have to track through a merchant book like what we saw today, what items were selling for earlier, and then how those prices were changing during the war, and then how much or if did those prices come down after the war. Also remembering that sometimes those prices in the South were in Confederate dollars, not US dollars. So great questions today. I appreciate all you all. I wish I could see you. I'm sad I'm not up there, but I'm also glad that this was done online virtually so that this can be a replay that's available later on. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Allison, and thank you everyone for joining. That concludes our presentation for today. Thank you very much.
You're so welcome.